All right, Abe, how are you doing today?
All right. How are you?
Good. Glad you're able to join us today for this short talk on co-housing as part of Newark Center for Meditative Culture's Deep Ecology series. So we're going to
Hmm.
get right into it. First, just want to ask you a little bit about your background. How do I notice you're an organizer in New Jersey and in other parts too. You keep yourself pretty busy. How did
Right.
you get into organizing and activism?
Well, I guess I was a kid when I got involved, but I think in terms of cooperative organizing, like we're talking about, I think that was in my college years. I was looking back on my education and what I liked and didn't like about different experiences, and I wanted to be involved with a school which had the students run the school. Found out that such a thing already exists, and I got involved with a democratic school in Connecticut called the Greenwood Sudbury School, and that was an amazing experience. The the students, the children, were part of the process of decision making at the school. They chose their own curriculum, and they had weekly meetings where they made decisions that were real life decisions, like school budgeting and hiring and firing staff, and some pretty big decisions. So I had that experience first, and the way that I was thinking about it was like, this is beautiful. Be nice to see this in a bigger scale in other places besides schools. What about workplaces? And I started looking into worker cooperatives and other kinds of cooperatives, and got involved with the GIA newsletter, the Grassroots Economic Organizing newsletter. And that was a great experience. I worked with some really amazing people like Frank T. Adams, who passed away some years ago, but wrote the book Putting Democracy to Work. And we had just some amazing people around the country starting different cooperatives. And Jessica Gordon Nebhart, who wrote the book um, Collective Courage, which is a history of Black cooperatives in the United States. And just amazing experiences. And from there I looked into intentional communities, thinking like, this is great for workplaces. What about whole neighborhoods? And so I started doing my research on eco villages, co-housing, activist communities, communes, um, all sorts of different kinds of intentional communities. So whole array of why people might choose to live together in an intentional way like that. So I visited many of them particularly around the East Coast. I went to some Catholic worker houses, which are both spiritual and activist communities. And I went to eco villages like Earth Haven Eco Village in North Carolina. That was an amazing experience to see how completely within nature they were living. The houses were made out of straw, sand, and mud and wood. It was that they had used from the site there. And Shannon Farms, all the communes in central Virginia, like Twin Oaks, Acorn, Living Energy Farm, and there's some others now too. Sapling, think they, I think, well, no, I think they changed the name from Sapling. But and Compersia in DC is an urban commune. So yeah, I find it particularly engaging and interesting to look at the way that people decide to live cooperatively on the structural and process side of things. Like, how do people make decisions collectively? And what do we do when we start coming in conflict with each other? Because there's no such thing as utopia. You don't move into a commune or a co-housing community and everything's perfect. I mean, anyone who's grown up with a family knows that there's conflict when you live with people, right?
Really natural.
Right.
Tell me something.
So,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. So when you live together, there are healthier and less healthy families, right? Like when there's conflict in a healthy community, you put it on the table. It's right there for everyone to see, and you deal with it rather than trying to pretend it doesn't exist. You know?
Tell me something. What is the goal? And I'm using the term co-housing, but as you brought up intentional communities, cooperatives, kind of give me an idea of what is the overall goal to these communities and what are the benefits for the environment?
Sure, absolutely. So co-housing communities are communities where people live in the same neighborhood. It could be an apartment building setup, or it could be different cottages spread out on land, but it's people living in close proximity to each other. And there are private spaces where this is my house and that's your house. And then there are common spaces where we might have a dining hall together, or a play area for the kids, or a game area with a pool table, or whatever we decide is the common space for everyone to congregate and socialize with each other. The co-housing communities commonly share meals together and are most often using consensus decision making, but finances are separate. So you have your income and your expenses. You pay for your share of the land or building, where it's your apartment or your cottage or your building is you have a certain price for whatever you're buying into the community for. And then there's a membership price that pays for all the common stuff. So that's how co-housing works. Co-housing came before eco-villages, and eco-villages often take a lot of that kind of structure, but they have a more specifically environmental focus. There are a couple different definitions of eco-villages. One's really loose, like people who want to live more environmentally together. That's the loosest definition of it. And the more specific one is one that moves towards self-functioning. There you have multiple businesses, and you have a goal of self-reliance, living off the land and such, growing your own food, building your own buildings, all those kind of goals, So there's a loose and a very strict definition that people have put out there for eco-villages. Some of the eco-villages out there are like basically gated communities, There are some like in the DC area, which are extremely expensive to join, and they might be LEED buildings, certified green buildings. And then there are some that are very affordable, but a lot more work, like Earth Haven Eco Village, right? Those buildings are a lot more environmental than like Blueberry Hill co-housing in DC, which you might have to have like 600,000 or 700,000 to join. But Earth Haven, you're going to put in your work. You're going to be working the land. You're going to be building your house. You're going to be doing it all. So there are many different kinds of eco-villages out there. There's a huge difference in carbon footprint if you live in a community like Earth Haven. Blueberry Hill co-housing, it's you're doing something, but it's a very privileged life,
Just for people who may not know, what is the term carbon footprint? What does that mean?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so we all have a certain amount of waste we put into the world, right? That could be the garbage in garbage cans, and it could be the exhaust from our cars. It could be everything that we do in our life that takes energy and produces waste, right? I mean, if you drive your own car by yourself to work every day, it's a higher carbon footprint than if you commute on a train with other people. It takes less energy, it produces less waste. So the UN has proposed that we globally need to reduce our carbon footprint by 90% to avoid runaway climate change. Now, that's a huge, huge change. So one thing that's very beautiful about these communities is some of them are demonstrating this already. So they're great examples, great experiment sometimes on how to live more in tune with nature. And some communities, like, so I was talking about co-housing and eco-villages. Now communes came, they're the original intentional community. They're full-on sharing, basically. You might have some things that are your own in your own building, but for the most part, your income is shared, your work goes towards the community. You share meals together, you share cars, you share bicycles, you share childcare. It's a high degree of sharing. Now, a lot of those communities have less carbon footprint than those eco-villages just by that sharing. Because if we are sharing resources, we're consuming a whole lot less, right? If you live in Twin Oaks community in the middle of Virginia, if I need to buy some clothes for myself, or if I need to get some groceries, if I need parts for my bicycle, whatever it is, whatever my needs are, I don't actually have to go out and get it myself. I just put it on a list, and some of the shoppers go and buy everything that everyone needs when they go off driving to Charlottesville. And then they come back with everything they need. Now, when we live very individually and separately, I'm driving out to Walmart, and then you're driving out to Walmart, and someone else is driving out. We're all driving cars separately. And there's all the shipping that goes to Walmart. When you live at Twin Oaks, one thing that you have 110 people there, a lot of the stuff can get directly shipped there in bulk. A lot of the food is grown there, like 85% of the food is grown right there on the land. And when you need to go buy something, there's one person or two people that go and get that and come back, and you can share a dozen cars among 110 people because you don't need a lot of cars. And that drastically reduces your carbon footprint. And it's efficient in terms of how much work you put into it as well. They only have to work 42 hours a week. It's with something they call a labor quota there, right? But that labor quota could be taking care of kids, or cleaning the bathrooms, or cooking the meals, things that you would do after you get home from work. Right. So on average, the income earning work that you do is only 17 and a half hours a week of less than the minimum wage work. That's all they need to support 110 people on a very good standard of living. So they have a really rich social life there. They have all this free time. They have parties. They have parents gathering together. They have a school on site. So there's the social and the environmental, benefits of all of that.
Great. Tell me this, how big would you say the movement is in the country, around the country, towards this kind of co-living and eco-villages, and how successful have the groups that have been experimenting with this over the years?
That's a good question. It's very, very small, I would say. Co-housing is probably the largest of the intentional community movements. It doesn't shake up people's cultural upbringing very much. You don't have to share your income with other people, right? But you're not going to every day run into someone who lives in an intentional community. It's pretty small, you know. So, I mean, in New Jersey, I would say where I am, there really aren't any intentional communities other than spiritual ones, you know. There are monasteries, there are convents, and there are some spiritual communities, but there aren't any intentional communities that I'm aware of at the moment. There are some people who live together on a farm. It's pretty loosely structured, but I wouldn't say there's any secular intentional communities in New Jersey right now. So, and when it comes to something more specific like communes, it's only a handful, which I think is unfortunate because when you talk about success, right, they might be considered fringe and they might be less common, but they are extremely successful at figuring out how do we live together? How do we live together in a way that people's needs are actually met and we are living much more in accordance with nature, you know? So these communes have places where you can come with absolutely nothing. You have no job, you have no house, you have no car. If you get accepted for membership, you suddenly have everything. You have a house, you have a job, you have health care. There is no homelessness, no hunger in these communities.
Right.
Now, my thinking on that is it's a shame that these communities are in the middle of Virginia, in the middle of Missouri, and almost entirely white. You know, there are places like Newark, New Jersey, or Philadelphia, you know, that a place where people could come and suddenly have all their needs met would be extremely powerful.
Right, definitely.
And I think there are a lot of people, particularly in more radical slants in communities of color that call for self-determination of their own communities. You know, people want to fight off gentrification, but there really is no way to fight off gentrification if you don't have common ownership and common decision making. You need to organize. Power comes from access, and a lot of communities don't have access to resources, and access comes from ownership and decision making, you know. So these are pretty powerful tools that are highly underused.
What do you think the barriers are, the challenges for the movement in terms of really exposing these alternatives to people? Because it seems like people really didn't even know about it.
Right. So there's a big challenge to the starting point we're at, right, with intentional communities. I think a couple of years ago, there was an intentional communities conference down in Twin Oaks that specifically decided to address issues of race and community, which was really powerful, really important. It should have been done a lot sooner than that, but it was a really challenging conversation for the people already in community, because most communities are entirely or mostly white, and a lot of them are living very privileged lives. I mean, even if in a commune where you don't own much of anything, you have a high standard of living, you have your needs met. That is privilege, you know. So it's hard to start from where it is and change it. So we need a very special group of people. We need people who are of more oppressed groups, people of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants, and we need all these people speaking for themselves and organizing for themselves. We don't need white communities welcoming people of color into their communities. So yeah, it's a challenge. I have to say it's a challenge, but we have some rich history of communities of colors having communities. I mean, Sojourner Truth lived in a Quaker community, and that's how she chose her name. And and communes and communities were a very big part of the abolition movement. And communities that were segregated, Black communities started cooperatives to empower themselves. You know, the white farmers were not helping them out, so they helped each other out. So there's a rich history, but I don't think a lot of people know that history. The Oakland Black Panther Party had a commune. A lot of Pan-Africanist communities have had communities. So it's out there. There's a good history of it, but it's still seen as fringe and everything like that. And while I think a lot of people understand that climate change is eminently important, it's an emergency, it's really hard for anyone to kind of readdress how we function in this world.
Yeah, definitely.
So we need people with a voice, with a story of coming from being in a place in the society of being more oppressed and being disempowered, that have had enough and are ready to organize for empowering their communities. We need charismatic people, but we need people who also know how to organize so that the power is shared. You know, when you have too few people at the top, when you have people who are the decision makers over others, it's really easy to attack a movement. I think that made the Black Panthers a very much easier target for COINTELPRO, you know. So yeah, we need some pretty amazing people who are ready to speak up and organize this way. I think it's important for the right conditions, because you need the ideology. You know, you need people who start understanding that we all have intrinsic worth. We are all equally important, and we all equally need and universally need things like healthcare and housing and food. And we need to start with that ideology, but we need to build cultures that acknowledge that acknowledge the oppressive larger culture. And then we need the structure of decision making, like consensus decision making. I mean, there's democracy too, majority rules. I'm a fan of consensus. And we need process for when we have conflict. We need conflict resolution. We need restorative justice. We need transformative justice. And we need agreements. We need policies that we agree upon together, rather than laws which are enforced violently, that, you know, that incarcerate many people. I mean, we have a very top-down society, and it's going in a certain direction where the haves and the have-nots, the difference between them, the disparity is growing exponentially. And exponentially means we're speeding up. And we're speeding up in the wrong direction. We're about to hit a wall. That speaks towards climate change. It speaks towards energy and our consumption, consumerism, and how much waste we put out into the world. And it also speaks to the economy. Like, when there's such disparity, things like Great Depressions or revolution happen. So we are at a boiling point, and we need to organize for that. When disasters like Katrina happen, the people who are most ready for those disasters were the people who organized collectively in their communities. Common Ground Collective in New Orleans was much more responsive than and adaptable to meeting the needs of communities than the Red Cross or FEMA was. Same happened in Hurricane Sandy. Occupy Sandy and a lot of other grassroots groups knew how to respond a lot better than FEMA and the Red Cross. There was a collective in the Red Bank area, Respond and Rebuild, that was teaching FEMA how to respond to mold in the houses. The grassroots groups knew what they were doing more than FEMA was, and they were training these large organizations, and they were people who just were doing it themselves. They were telling FEMA, no, listen, you're doing it wrong. You're putting bleach on mold. All you're doing is making the mold invisible, but it's still there. It makes it translucent, but it does not get rid of the mold. So they were teaching FEMA, they were feeding FEMA. The people from FEMA were eating from their street kitchens. You know, like they were much more responsive to these situations. And we have disaster capitalism. People take advantage of disasters for their own personal gain, and it's a great way to push out people who are in their own communities already. You know, New Orleans, there was a huge development push in the community, and they were trying to put people of color out of their own communities so that they could build resorts and bed and breakfasts and restaurants and all these things for tourism, but not for the people who already live there. So I mean, there's this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which I think is really important, that, you know, John Lennon and Yoko Ono plastered on Times Square, you know, like those who love peace must learn how to organize as effectively as those who love war. Now, to me, you could replace peace and war with anything. Right. But if we're talking about peace, we also have to tangibly talk about what that means specifically, right? Not just philosophically. So I think it's important to organize more effectively than the people who have power. The people who have power are super organized. It may be a top-down kind of organizing, but they have the resources, they have the power, they have the means to get things done. And we need to switch that around because they're driving this Titanic ship into an iceberg. And we need to take the controls ourselves, and we need to change things around because we're speeding up and we're about to hit a wall. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it is very, very accurate to say we are destroying the world. We are coming. We are in my children's generation and their children's generation, things will be kind of unrecognizable to us. We have a situation right now where there's a huge glacier the size of Florida in West Antarctica that is past the point of no return. It is going to slide to sea, and that means a huge amount of sea level rise. And when that goes, it's more likely for more to come with it. And eventually that whole glacier will be like 30 feet of sea level rise. And that means that coastal cities are done. A lot of them, right? Like East Harlem, South Bronx, a lot of Brooklyn, Jersey City, certain parts of Jersey City, Hoboken definitely, downtown Newark, they're all underwater, but not just that. Manhattan might not be a lot underwater, but everything that's underground will be underwater. So that means sewage, water, electricity, subways, all those things will be done for good. We're not talking about the kind of flooding that happened with Hurricane Sandy. We're talking about permanent sea level rise. So New York City actually has a plan in order for this. some years ago, they put together a climate change response plan. It was hundreds of pages long, but it boils down to the fact that their plan for climate change is evacuation.
Right.
They put in it that they can't put up levees because all of the land around New York City is privately owned. And it would be a huge undertaking even if they could. And they would have to do it completely. If you put a wall on one section of Manhattan and not the other, the water will just flow right around that wall. So their plan is just an evacuation route. That's their plan for climate change. They know it's happening, and that's their plan. So, yeah, I mean, we're not responding to these situations like they're as dramatic and scary as they are. But this is something in our lifetime, most likely. Some years ago, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the prediction was these glaciers in West Antarctica and Greenland, one of them might slide to sea within the next, well, over a century. They said over 100 years. That got cut down to 70 years, then it got cut down to 50 years. Now, you know, a couple years ago, it was 20 years that they expected to happen. Now, they just can't keep up with it. Their predictions keep falling short. And a lot of it is due to the fact that they are more conservative with their estimates because they don't want to be alarmist. They don't want to shake things up. They don't want to shake up the system that we have. And these are organizations that are reporting to larger governments. So if they make a very dramatic prediction that's too dramatic, then they're not going to get the funding that they need. Their predictions always fall short. And right now we're down to 15 or 20 years. And that probably means more like 5 to 10 years if we're going off of, you know, them always falling short.
Right. 15, 20 years is not really a long time.
Not at all. And we're not responding to it like it's around the corner.
Tell me,
yeah.
If people wanted to find out more and really wanted to get, you know, up to speed on this, what are some good resources, whether they're websites, books, whatever, what could you use to really get up to speed?
Sure. So IC.org is a great website. That's they changed their name recently. They were the Fellowship of Intentional Communities. I believe they're the Federation of Intentional Communities now, but it's IC for Intentional Communities.org. And they have a directory of all the intentional communities around the country and a little beyond. And that's all sorts of intentional communities, whether it's an activist community or spiritual community, co-housing, housing cooperatives, eco-villages, communes. It's all of the above there. And it also is a lot of forming communities. So they'll give you a directory, and you may see a lot of communities here that are intentions of studying intentional communities, but they have it all there. You know, it will say if it's forming or if it's together, and it gives you all the information. If you want a certain kind of community, you can check all the boxes of the kind of community you're looking for, and they'll help you find it. So that's a really great resource. They also have a lot of articles about intentional community. They have a magazine as well, Community Living. So they are a wonderful organization. The Federation of Egalitarian Communities is specifically for egalitarian communities or communes, and their website is thefec.org, and they are you know, a handful of secular intentional communities in the United States and one in Canada that really know their stuff. I mean, one thing that you'll find if anyone wants to be a founder of one of these communities is there's a lot of help out there. If you want to join or start a community, actually, people are very responsive and very helpful to getting you the information you need. So those are great organizations. For cooperatives in general, well, I mean, worker cooperatives, since we touched on that a little bit, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is a really wonderful organization. And they have workshops and trainings online and many cities too, like New York City. So it's there are a lot of resources out there. We maybe need to get the word out a little bit better than we have. People need to know that these things are out there, but there are a lot of resources for people. And there's a whole directory of books for intentional communities at ic.org. And there's a whole bunch of books and online resources about co-ops with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. There are other co-op organizations like NASCO that help with housing cooperatives and other kinds of cooperatives. There's a lot of resources out there. There's resources for community land trusts, which we really didn't cover so much, but there's a whole lot out there, and there's a lot of legal help as well too. You can spend the rest of your life reading the resources that are out there, but it's also the resources are also very personally available. If you wanted to go and visit one of these communities, a lot of them are very welcoming to a visit. And I think that's a really great way to learn about them, is to see it in person.
Okay. I want to thank you for shedding a lot of light, really, because I don't think this idea has gotten out to the community. And one of the things that we lack is really the knowledge of alternatives. If people don't know alternatives are out there, they just want to keep going in the same route that they've been going. So it's good to get this information out.
Yes,
so,
I agree.
I just want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
Any last words?
No, I really encourage anyone who wants to get involved, either joining or starting a community of their own, to get going on it. It is a lot of work. It's not light work, but it's something that this world needs, and I think we need more people, particularly in underrepresented communities, doing this work.
I agree with you. And as you said earlier, the benefits are not just environmental, but their benefits are both social and environmental, and we can use them both.
Absolutely.
All right, Abe, thank you very much. And
thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.